Welcome everyone to Trend Micro Talks. I am your host, Erin Tomie, and today we're talking to Trend Micro Senior Threat Researcher, David Sancho. David, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, Erin. How are you?
I am very good. I'm really happy to have you. I would love to start with you sharing a bit about your role here at Trend Micro.
Yeah. Well, I'm a threat researcher, and I've been with Trend for 20 years now. And what we do in threat research is we try to take a look at what the bad guys are doing right now and try to forecast or try to see where they're going with your attacks so that we can have an idea of what's coming up in the next, say, 3 to 5 years.
Well, David, like you said, you've been at Trend Micro for over 20 years, with the last 15 as a senior threat researcher. What are a few projects or pieces of research that really stand out to you as the most interesting to work on over the years?
Well, one of the really cool ones that we've had is recently we talked about ransomware, and we created a piece that was focused on how ransomware has changed from the old style ransomware that people are very well acquainted with until the current very targeted, very dangerous, really high ransom kind of attacks that we're experiencing today. And the reason why it was very interesting, it was because it was a very technical piece, and we were a lot of people in it. So the synchronization, the coordination between this many people into a very large paper was a really cool experience. Everybody was really cool, but everybody had specialized on a different area. So it was a very, very nice paper. We called it the Nephilim paper because we chose to focus on one particular ransomware gang, which was Nephilim. But we actually uh, gave it the perspective of why or how is it changing from the old style to the new style. So you see, we do a little bit of very technical papers, but we also try to see what's actually happening, what the minds behind the attacks are thinking. And that's the cool thing about what we do. We not only look at bits and bytes, but we also try to find whoever's behind.
I really like what you said about you're not just looking at the bits and bytes when you're doing research, and you kind of have this whole other side that's really the psychology behind bad threat actors and trying to figure out okay what's coming in the future. And I think also being a threat researcher for 15 years, you've been able to you've been deep in all of this information to watch it evolve and see how not only the technology is changing but also how the mindset is changing of the hackers and the bad actors in the environment.
Yep, and that you can see a reflection of that in the criminal underground. That's the amount of forums and communication tools that the bad guys use to just coordinate themselves, and that's where the attacks actually get cooking, right? That they you can see the discussions that they're having, the kind of ideas that they come up with. So trying to see those, that's just like the human aspect of the whole threat. That's as interesting as looking at the bits and bytes, which is of course something, it's a requirement in our business.
Well, David, what research are you currently working on?
So right now we're looking at this is really cool because ransomware is very popular. So what we're trying to come up with, trying to forecast what ransomware will evolve into, because historically we've seen that any kind of very popular threat, it's not unmovable. It always goes somewhere. It always evolves into something new. So we're trying to find ways where the attackers will evolve ransomware in it's something else, right? So they either will evolve into something or create a revolution that will change a business plan and will move completely to a different place. So we call it the post ransomware era, and we're trying to come up with those possibilities for attackers to evolve into.
David, as I mentioned at the beginning of our chat, you've been a senior threat researcher for over 15 years. Obviously, it's something that you enjoy doing. Would you share a bit with our audience about why you find this type of work so rewarding?
Well, the very different perspective of the threat research job is that our enemies are actually the bad guys. So, whereas when I was at pre-sales in those 5 years before I was a researcher, we were always talking to clients about competitors. Those are our main sources of interaction. That gets kind of always the same, right? Because the market doesn't move that much. So once you have your products and what you know already pretty much under your belt, that's that's done, right? It tends to get boring. Whereas the threat research is never boring because the attacks are so dynamic and they change so quickly. There are so many new attacks in every year that you don't even have time to get bored. You're always learning. So that's a very exciting part of what we do, and that makes it always very interesting.
Yeah, I bet. And like you said, you're also looking at not just the past and how much it changed, but also looking into the future and trying to estimate what that's going to look like a year, 5 years, 10 years down the line, and how organizations and the everyday person can prepare for it.
That's actually a challenge because looking at the past is easy, but looking at the future, our crystal balls are not very good. So we need to develop techniques to try to find out. So what we do is we try to analyze what's happening now and we try to put that into the future. Where is it going to continue? If not, why not and how? So there's a lot of techniques that we can use to try to gaze at the future, so to speak. But yeah, it's a very interesting aspect, and one of the things that we do very often is to brainstorm these kind of topics, and we've had some a few of those we call it Futurama projects that try to come up with what's going to happen in the future, and that's part of what you were saying earlier about the Web3 project, right? That came up as part of one of our Futurama projects. Is what if, and that's a lot of fun because we schedule that into a couple of calls, and everybody brainstorms and pitches their ideas and what kind of attacks there could be, and we end up writing a paper on it. And it happened also, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, on the extortion, the future of extortion attacks, how extortion might develop. And the funny thing is now with the perspective of 4 years that have passed, you look at it, it's like, okay, actually we were right in a lot of those things that we said. So it is kind of fun to see that kind of futurology part of our job.
David, thank you so much for joining me on Trend Micro Talks. This has been super interesting. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
It was my pleasure. All the best.